They thought it was funny. Cameras flashing, laughter echoing through the airport lounge. As a man who built empires stood humiliated, his dignity stripped strand by strand. He didn't shout, didn't curse, didn't even move. But behind those calm eyes burned a storm that no one saw coming. That night they laughed at his pain. The next morning, their entire world came crashing down around them, because what they thought was a joke turned into the biggest mistake the airline ever made. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. Malcolm Reed had learned early that the world didn't hand out respect. You had to carve it inch by inch, with hands that refused to tremble. He grew up in a neighborhood that was forgotten by time, cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, and laughter that often hid pain. His mother, Lorraine, was his first hero, a woman who worked double shifts cleaning offices of people who never knew her name. She would come home exhausted but still smile, still hum hymns while folding his clothes. "You don't fight the world with anger, baby," she'd tell him, pressing a calloused hand to his cheek. "You fight it with proof." And he did. Every scholarship he earned, every late-night study session, every promotion, they were all proof that he was more than what they expected him to be. He didn't inherit wealth or influence. He built them, brick by brick, powered by the memory of a mother who refused to break. By 42, Malcolm wasn't just successful. He was respected. The CEO of Reed Global Logistics, a company that began with one truck and now runs fleets across continents. But even then, the ghosts of prejudice never truly left. They lingered in boardroom glances, in the way strangers doubted his presence in first class, in how every victory felt like it came with an asterisk. Still, he rose each morning with purpose. 5 a.m. runs through quiet streets, black coffee before sunrise, and a moment to whisper gratitude before facing the world. He believed discipline was freedom, that calm was power. He never let bitterness define him. But deep inside, under the armor of patience, he still remembered what it felt like to be underestimated. He carried it quietly, like an old scar beneath a suit. That morning, the airport hummed with its usual rhythm, echoing footsteps, mechanical announcements, the faint smell of roasted beans and jet fuel. The sky beyond the terminal glass was pale gold, streaked with early sunlight. Malcolm moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, his silver briefcase gleaming faintly under fluorescent lights. He was flying to New York for a meeting that could significantly alter the scope of his company, a partnership with one of Europe's most extensive transportation networks. He arrived early, as always. Punctuality was his unspoken code. He handed his ticket to the check-in clerk, a young woman with a polished smile that flickered when she saw his name. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said. Her tone was professional, but there was hesitation beneath it, something he'd heard too many times before. Her eyes lingered on the gold elite member tag beside his name, then darted away. He smiled politely. "Good morning." She glanced at her coworker, then at him again, as if silently verifying whether what she saw made sense. He ignored it. It wasn't worth the energy. When she handed back his ticket, she added, "The lounge is just ahead, sir." "Enjoy your flight?" The smile didn't reach her eyes. He thanked her anyway and walked on. To anyone else, it was an ordinary exchange. To Malcolm, it was a reminder that no matter how far he climbed, the world still measured him by the color of his skin before the weight of his accomplishments. Still, he straightened his shoulders and moved forward. Success, he had learned, wasn't about escaping those moments. It was about walking through them without letting them shrink you. The premium lounge was quiet, dressed in muted luxury, soft leather seats, warm lighting, and low music that tried too hard to feel exclusive. Malcolm settled near the window, laptop open, eyes sharp on the presentation he'd perfected over weeks. Around him, people chatted in low tones, business suits blending into the hum of privilege. He'd been here countless times before, yet the air today carried a different weight. He felt it before he saw it. That shift in atmosphere when glances turn from polite to piercing. A trio of staff by the espresso counter laughed softly, then turned their eyes toward him. A man in a pilot's jacket whispered something to the attendant beside him, both chuckling under their breath. Malcolm didn't need to hear the words. He knew the rhythm of ridicule too well. It was never loud. It was always quiet enough to deny. He focused on his screen, fingers steady, though his stomach tightened. Decades of self-control kept him still. He'd faced moments like this before, in college dorms where professors assumed his scholarship was charity, in offices where clients asked for the real boss. But each time, he had fought not with fury, but with excellence. Then came a tap on his shoulder. "Excuse me." "Sir," a young attendant said. Her tone was light, rehearsed. "Could you come with me for a quick verification?" "It'll only take a second." Malcolm blinked, surprised. "Verification?" "Yes, sir. Just a new lounge security measure. We're confirming member details today." He hesitated, his instinct whispering, "Don't go." But professionalism was his armor. So he nodded and followed. The corridor behind the lounge was narrow and cold, humming with the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Two more attendants stood there, chatting in hushed tones. When they noticed him, their conversation abruptly stopped. "Right this way, sir," one said, his grin too wide to be genuine. They guided him toward a seat near the back. "We'll just need a quick photo, sir. New protocol," said another. Malcolm adjusted his tie, nodding calmly. Then came the sound, a faint buzzing that didn't belong in any camera. Before he could turn, laughter broke out behind him. The buzz grew louder, sharper, and then, before he could react, something grazed the side of his head. Cold metal, rough vibration, followed by an eruption of laughter. His body froze. For a second his mind couldn't register what was happening. He turned, stunned. In one attendant's hand, a pair of electric clippers buzzed like a wasp. Another held up a phone to film. "Relax, sir," one of them said between laughs. "It's just a joke." The world tilted. The laughter blurred into noise. He raised a trembling hand to his head, a patch of hair gone, shaven unevenly. His heart pounded, blood rushing in his ears. But even then he didn't scream. He didn't shove. He didn't curse. Years of restraint anchored him still. "Do you think this is funny?" he asked quietly, voice low and firm. The laughter faded. The attendants exchanged uncertain glances, but one muttered, "It was just a bit of fun, man." Malcolm stared at them for a long moment. "A bit of fun?" His tone didn't rise, but the weight of his gaze silenced the room. Without another word, he stood, straightened his jacket, and walked away. Every step slow, deliberate, and heavy, with something more profound than anger. The lounge went silent when he re-entered. Conversations faltered, screens dimmed, and eyes turned. People stared not at a man, but at a spectacle, a rumor on the walk. He caught his reflection in the window, his hair uneven, scalp visible, dignity shattered. He looked smaller, yet somehow more potent in that stillness. Whispers spread like fire. Phones clicked. A few staff members avoided his gaze, pretending to be busy. Others couldn't hide their smirks. He wanted to say something, anything, but what could words fix? So, he picked up his briefcase and laptop and began walking toward the exit. Each footstep echoed with years of swallowed pride. Behind him, the laughter that started it all had died into uneasy quiet. The same people who mocked him now avoided his eyes, sensing something they couldn't name. a dangerous calm. Outside the lounge, the air hit cold against his skin. His phone buzzed. Notifications flooded in, a viral clip. Hashtags forming. Someone had already uploaded the joke. His humiliation had become entertainment for millions. But as he watched the screen, his expression didn't change. Beneath the pain, a colder resolve began to take shape, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't rush, but plans. He took one deep breath, then another. The world had tried to humiliate him in public. Soon the same world would watch when he took his dignity and their empire back. They had shaved his head for laughs. But in doing so, they had shaved off their own future, because Malcolm Reed was not a man you could humiliate and walk away from. He was a storm disguised as silence, and his silence was about to destroy them. The silence after the laughter. Variant Jack's standard. The laughter still echoed in Malcolm's ears long after it had stopped. He couldn't tell whether it came from the crowd that had gathered around him minutes earlier, or if it was his own mind replaying that unbearable moment, the sight of his hair, falling in uneven clumps on the cold, polished floor of the terminal. The razor's buzz had faded, but its vibration still lived in his chest. His reflection in the glass wall near the departure gate looked like someone else, a man stripped of dignity, standing in the very place where he was supposed to be respected. He stood there for a moment, frozen, while the crowd dispersed. No one approached him, not even to apologize, let alone ask if he was okay. Their eyes told the story. Some were embarrassed, others were entertained, and a few were indifferent. That quiet indifference hurt more than the laughter itself, because laughter ends but silence stays. He could feel it pressing on him like invisible hands, suffocating, mocking him. His palms trembled as he reached into his coat pocket for his phone. The security guard nearby shifted awkwardly, pretending to check his radio. Malcolm's fingers brushed over his phone screen, but he didn't unlock it. He didn't even know what he would say if he were to call someone. How do you explain that your humanity was just turned into a joke? He walked away from the gate, each step heavier than the last. The terminal lights above seemed harsher now, reflecting the sterile, cruel nature of the space. A janitor swept the floor where he had stood, brushing away the last traces of his hair. The sound of the broom dragging over the tiles cut through him. He turned away quickly, heading toward the restroom, desperate to hide, even if just for a few minutes. Inside, he leaned against the sink, staring into the mirror. The man who looked back at him wasn't the confident CEO who had walked into the airport that morning. This man looked broken, bewildered, and small. His hair, once neatly trimmed and dignified, was now an uneven mess. The edges of his scalp burned from the cheap clippers they'd used. He splashed water on his face, watching it drip down onto the porcelain basin, each droplet marking a silent beat of disbelief. "Why?" he whispered to himself. "Why me?" He wasn't asking for an answer. He already knew it. It wasn't about who he was. It was about what they saw when they looked at him. A black man, standing in a place where they didn't think he belonged. The uniformed employees hadn't seen Malcolm Reed, the accomplished businessman, the keynote speaker, flying out to represent his company. They'd seen a target, something to laugh at, something less than them. As he stood there, he remembered the faces of the people who had been recording the incident. Phones held high, smiles wide, thinking it was a form of entertainment. His humiliation was already becoming a source of amusement. Somewhere, maybe even right now, his pain was being uploaded, shared, and captioned with laughing emojis. His stomach churned. He gripped the edges of the sink until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, but he knew what that would look like. The angry black man, another stereotype they'd used to justify their cruelty. So he swallowed the rage, the hurt, the shame, and forced himself to breathe. He pulled out his phone again, opened the camera, and took a photo of himself. The flash startled him, but he didn't flinch. He looked at the image, his raw face, red eyes, and jagged hairline. That was the truth now. Proof. Evidence of how easily power could humiliate decency. He didn't know it yet, but that photo would change everything. Malcolm straightened up. His heart still raced, but his mind began to focus. He wiped his face with a paper towel and looked back at his reflection, this time longer, steadier. The man staring back at him was still hurt, but not helpless. Somewhere beneath the weight of humiliation, something else stirred, a spark. The same resilience that had built him from nothing. The same fire that had carried him through every closed door whispered doubt. He adjusted his tie, the only piece of his appearance still intact, and whispered to himself, "They'll remember this." Then he walked out of the restroom. The same employees who had mocked him moments ago froze as he passed. The laughter had died. The whispers had begun, but Malcolm didn't stop. He kept walking, each step sharper and more deliberate, the sound of his shoes slicing through the tense air. A man walking away, not in defeat, but in silence so heavy it demanded to be felt, and behind him, the cameras were still recording. By the time Malcolm's plane lifted off the runway, his humiliation was already halfway around the world. He sat by the window, hands clenched together, trying to hold his breath steady. He hadn't said a word since boarding. The flight attendants crept, too aware, too cautious. They'd heard. Everyone had. The laughter that began in one terminal had now turned into an online storm. Ruthless, echoing, unstoppable. Somewhere between the clouds, his pain became trending entertainment. His phone buzzed non-stop in airplane mode, dozens of missed calls, hundreds of notifications waiting behind the silent screen. He couldn't bring himself to look. Every vibration was a reminder that the world was talking about him. Not as a man, not as a CEO, but as a meme. He rested his head against the window, eyes tracing the endless gray sky. The world looked calm from up here, as if nothing had happened. But below those clouds, his name was now being hashtagged by millions who didn't even know who he was. When the plane landed, he finally turned the phone on. Within seconds, the screen lit up in chaos. His inbox overflowed. "Are you okay, Malcolm? Please call me immediately." They went too far. And beneath those messages, the ones that burned the most, "You deserved it." "Just a joke, man. Laugh it off." "Maybe you should have smiled more." His breath caught in his throat. He scrolled faster, fingers trembling, each comment slicing through him like paper cuts. His photo, the one he took in the airport restroom, was everywhere. People had cropped it, filtered it, and turned it into reaction memes. He saw his own face edited next to clowns, gifs, and captions that mocked his pain. His humanity was now a joke in people's timelines. Malcolm stood frozen in the arrival hall. Around him, people went on with their day, laughing, hurrying, living. But for him, the world had changed. He could feel the invisible eyes, the whispers, the pity of those who recognized him. Every step felt like walking through glass. Then, amid the storm of cruelty, a single message caught his attention. It was from someone he hadn't heard from in years. Naomi Patterson, a journalist and old college friend. Her message was short. "I saw what they did to you. Don't let this go. Tell your story. I'll make sure the world listens." For the first time since it happened, something inside him shifted. Hope. Not much. Just a thread. Fragile but real. He called her back, his voice low but firm. "I'm not ready," he said. "Not yet. I understand," Naomi replied. But the world is watching now. They need to see what they've done. That night, Malcolm stayed in his hotel room. The walls felt too close, the light too sharp. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he heard the buzz of the razor, the laughter, the flash of phones. He tossed and turned until dawn, then finally got up and opened his laptop. There it was, a video uploaded just hours ago, already with millions of views. Airline staff give CEO an unforgettable haircut. He pressed play. The video began with laughter. Blurred faces, muffled voices, but his was clear. His confusion, his protests, the cruel laughter. And then the clippers. The sound filled the room, louder than it ever was in real life. His chest tightened. He couldn't breathe. At the end of the video, as his hair fell to the floor, someone in the background shouted, "Lighten up! It's just a joke!" The comment section was a battlefield. Some defended him, others mocked him. The worst ones justified it, twisting the story, claiming he overreacted. Malcolm scrolled, each word adding fuel to a fire building inside his chest. He closed the laptop and stood by the window, looking down at the city below, calm, unaware, peaceful. "Just a joke," he muttered. "They think this is funny." That phrase, "just a joke," echoed in his head, over and over until it didn't sound like words anymore, just poison. That was how they excused everything, every insult, every stereotype, every humiliation. But this time he wouldn't let it fade away. He picked up his phone again and texted Naomi. "I'm ready. Let's talk." Her reply came instantly. "Good. Let's make them answer for it." Malcolm sat down, opened his notes app, and began writing. Every detail, every face, every laugh. He poured it all out, not for pity, but for truth. Each word was a wound reopened, but also a weapon sharpened. He didn't know it yet, but the story he was writing would ignite a movement. What began as humiliation would soon become revelation, and somewhere inside he felt it. The first flicker of power returning. Outside his window, the morning light broke through the clouds. For the first time since the incident, Malcolm didn't look away. But far across town, in the airline's corporate offices, executives were panicking. The video had reached investors, journalists, and even government officials. The company's PR team scrambled to contain the damage, but it was too late. The world had seen, and the world was angry. As Malcolm closed his laptop, his phone buzzed again. Naomi had sent another message. "You have no idea what's coming next." He didn't. Not yet. But he was about to find out. Naomi didn't waste a second. Within hours of Malcolm's call, she assembled her small but relentless team of investigative journalists. The office lights glowed late into the night as they gathered around screens filled with headlines, comments, and screenshots of the viral video. Everyone was talking about the airport incident. Still, almost no one knew the truth, that the man humiliated in the video was one of the most respected black CEOs in the country. When Naomi's article went live the next morning, it didn't just tell a story. It also told a story. It struck a nerve. It wasn't a joke. Airline staff publicly humiliate black CEO in viral video. Those words appeared on millions of screens before sunrise. The story detailed everything. How Malcolm had been stopped, mocked, and forcibly shaved as a security prank. It included his photo, the same one he had taken in the restroom, but now framed with context, not mockery. It included his statement, "They took my dignity, but not my voice." The internet exploded again, but this time the laughter turned to outrage. Thousands of people demanded accountability. Activists, celebrities, and ordinary travelers began sharing the story, calling for boycotts. Hashtags filled every feed. Justice for Malcolm. End airport abuse. Not a joke. Malcolm sat in silence as he watched the chaos unfold from his hotel room. The same world that had mocked him was now fighting for him. He didn't know how to feel. Grateful, angry, overwhelmed. His phone rang endlessly. News outlets, talk shows, even government officials wanting statements. But he didn't answer any of them. Not yet, Naomi's voice came through on a private call. Malcolm, it's happening. The world's on your side now. You need to speak once. Let them see who you are, he hesitated. The fear hadn't entirely left him. He remembered the eyes, the laughter, the sound of the clippers. But then he looked again at the article headline, and something inside him settled. All right, he said quietly. Set it up. That evening, Naomi arranged a live interview on one of the country's largest networks. It wasn't just news anymore. It was a movement. The host introduced him with gravity. Tonight, we speak to Malcolm Reed, the man behind the video that has shocked the world. When the camera light turned red, Malcolm took a deep breath. He didn't rehearse. He didn't read from notes. He just spoke, calmly, honestly, from the wound still bleeding inside him. I walked into that airport thinking I was just another traveler, he said. But to them, I was something else. Not a CEO, not a speaker. Just a joke. They didn't even know my name, and they didn't care. But I'm not angry because they shaved my head. I'm angry because they thought they could. The studio was silent. Viewers watching from home could feel the weight of each word. His voice cracked once, just enough to show the pain was real. If it can happen to me, he said, then it can happen to anyone who looks like me. And if I stay silent, it'll keep happening. By the time the interview ended, social media had erupted again, but now with support. Major networks replayed his words. Protesters gathered outside the airline's headquarters, chanting, "Justice, justice, justice." Airlines worldwide began reviewing their internal conduct rules. What started as one man's humiliation had sparked a conversation no PR team could silence. But not everyone was celebrating. Behind closed doors, the airline's executives were in crisis mode. Board meetings stretched into the early hours. Stock prices dipped. Investors were furious. The employees involved in the incident, those who had laughed, filmed, and shaved Malcolm's hair, were suspended pending investigation. Yet, among them whispers spread, some of them defiant, some scared. A few claimed it was blown out of proportion, while others confessed that they never wanted to participate in the joke, but were pressured into doing so. The internal conflict was tearing the company apart. Meanwhile, Malcolm's story continued to grow. Naomi helped him publish an op-ed, a powerful, eloquent piece titled, "Dignity Isn't a Joke." Within hours, it became one of the most shared articles of the year. His words read like a manifesto for every person who had ever been disrespected, devalued, or dehumanized because of the color of their skin. They laughed that day because they thought humiliation was power, he wrote. But power isn't laughter. Power is standing back up and making sure no one else falls the same way. The article went viral again, but this time the focus shifted. People began sharing their own stories. Airport searches gone wrong, racist remarks at check-in counters, moments they had buried deep. The floodgates were open. Naomi looked at Malcolm during their next meeting, a mix of pride and exhaustion in her eyes. "You've started something bigger than either of us," she said. He gave a faint smile. "Then we finish it." But he didn't realize. The higher the fire burned, the more dangerous it became. By the end of that week, the airline released a public statement, a cold, rehearsed apology read by a spokesperson. "We deeply regret the unfortunate misunderstanding," it said, "and we are taking steps to ensure it never happens again." The words were hollow. The damage was done. People were furious. Protesters stormed the airline's social media accounts, tagging every sponsor, every partner. The outrage spread beyond borders. News outlets in Europe, Africa, and Asia picked up on it. Malcolm's name became a symbol of resistance. But with fame came shadows. One morning, Malcolm woke to dozens of hate emails, threats, racial slurs, attempts to silence him. Some told him to move on, others promised he'd regret this. He felt that old fear again, creeping up from the same darkness that had mocked him in that terminal. He showed one message to Naomi. She looked at him, her face tightening. "They're scared," she said. "That means you're winning." Malcolm didn't answer. He just stared at the message on his phone. A single sentence that felt like a warning, not a joke. "You've embarrassed the wrong people." He turned off the screen and looked out the window. The city below was glowing, alive, unaware of the storm still brewing. The fire had started, but it was far from over. The sound of sirens filled the air like a swarm of angry bees. Blue and red lights flashed against the walls of the narrow street, casting a haunting rhythm that matched the panic in Malik's chest. His hands were already up, high, trembling, but the shouts kept coming. "Get on the ground." The command was sharp, slicing through the air. He hesitated for a second, his voice shaking. "I didn't do anything." But before he could finish, the butt of a flashlight slammed against his ribs, sending him crashing to the pavement. He gasped for air, the cold concrete biting into his cheek. His vision blurred as boots stomped closer, voices overlapping, accusations, threats, curses. One officer yanked his bag open, tossing everything onto the ground, his wallet, his notebook, a photograph of his mother. "Where's the weapon?" the officer demanded. "There's no weapon," Malik choked out. "I'm just—" His words were cut short by a kick to the stomach. Pain radiated through him, but worse than the pain was the realization. No one was listening. No one cared. Across the street, people had started to gather. Some recorded with their phones, whispering, "He's not fighting back." Others turned away, afraid of getting involved. Malik's eyes darted from one face to another, searching for help, for someone, anyone, to step forward. But all he saw were shadows of fear. A woman whispered, "They're going too far," and then lowered her phone when an officer turned his glare toward her. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every breath Malik took was a struggle, every second heavier than the last. The officers kept shouting, their words blurring into noise. "Stop resisting! Hands behind your back!" Even though his body lay limp, his hands already bound. He felt the cold metal of the handcuffs bite into his skin, tighter with every movement, as if the steel itself wanted to punish him for existing. As they dragged him toward the patrol car, Malik's gaze caught the reflection in a store window, his face bruised, shirt torn, blood trickling from his lip. For the first time, he didn't recognize himself. He wasn't the quiet boy who dreamed of college, who cared for his mother, who helped old Mrs. Henderson carry groceries. He looked like what they saw, a threat, an enemy, something less than human. Inside the car, the doors slammed shut with a metallic finality. The world outside blurred through the window, a world that had judged him before knowing him. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pain, but from something more profound. Betrayal, helplessness, rage. He whispered to himself, "They don't even see me," and outside the crowd began to disperse. The sirens faded into the night. The only thing that remained was a trail of questions, trembling in the silence he left behind. But this was not the end. This was the breaking point. The moment the world would soon see not just Malik's pain, but the truth that could no longer be hidden. For somewhere in that crowd, one phone didn't stop recording, and what it captured would change everything. When the video went viral on the internet, it spread like wildfire. Within hours, the world had seen what Malik had endured. Every scream, every strike, every desperate breath. The footage was raw, unfiltered, impossible to deny. The hashtag with his name trended across every platform, and people began to ask the same question: how could this happen? Initially, the local police department attempted to control the narrative. Their statement read, "Suspect resisted arrest during a routine stop." But the video told a different truth, one that millions of eyes had already witnessed. It showed a young man, unarmed and pleading for mercy. It showed officers using force long after he'd stopped moving. It showed a system that treated his life as disposable. News stations replayed the clip on loop, each frame dissected, analyzed, and debated. Some called it a tragedy. Others called it justice, justice, justice served. But those who knew Malik, the ones who saw the kindness in his smile, the patience in his eyes, knew it was neither. It was something worse. It was a reminder that no matter how good, humble, or innocent you were, the color of your skin could still decide your fate. His mother, Evelyn, sat before a sea of microphones days later, her voice trembling but steady. "My son was not a suspect. He was a human being," she said. "He had dreams. He had a life. And they took it from him." Her words pierced the hearts of millions. Crowds began to gather outside the courthouse, holding candles, chanting his name. Justice for Malik. Their voices grew into something powerful, something unstoppable. But power comes with pressure. The officers were placed on administrative leave, a phrase that only fueled more anger. Protesters filled the streets. Handmade signs rose like waves. "Enough is enough. Say his name. We can't breathe." The world that had once scrolled past stories like this now stood still. People of every background came together, bound by shared outrage and a demand for change. Yet behind every chant was the haunting memory of the night itself, the flashing lights, the helpless cries, the look in Malik's eyes. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement. Late one evening, as candles flickered across the city square, a man stepped onto a small stage. He held the phone that had captured the video. His voice cracked as he said, "I didn't mean to record history that night. I just wanted to make sure the truth wasn't buried." The crowd fell silent. In that moment, they understood. The truth had finally been seen, but justice, justice, justice was still far away. Evelyn watched from her window as thousands marched in her son's name. Her heart ached, yet beneath the sorrow burned a quiet strength. Malik's story had begun in pain, but now it was sparking something far greater. For every mother who had lost a child, every man who had walked in fear, every voice that had gone unheard, his story had become theirs. And as the chants echoed through the night, raw, relentless, and united, it was clear. The world could never unsee what it had seen. Malik's name had become more than a headline. It had become a reminder, a reckoning, and the beginning of something that could finally break the silence. The moment when truth begins to shake the system, and Evelyn, Malik's mother, walks into the storm the world has created around her son. The morning the trial began, the sky was a heavy gray, as if even the heavens carried the grief of what had happened. Crowds filled the courthouse steps, people of every race, every age, holding banners with Malik's face printed across them. His eyes, calm and kind in life, had become a symbol of all those who had been silenced before him. The chants rose like thunder, steady and unbroken. "Justice for Malik! Justice for Malik!" Inside, Evelyn sat quietly in the front row, her fingers twisting the silver bracelet her son had given her years ago. Cameras flashed, lawyers whispered, and the hum of tension pulsed through the courtroom like static. She looked toward the defense table where the officers sat. They were expressionless, dressed in pressed suits, their faces calm in a way that almost seemed rehearsed. When the prosecutor began to speak, his words filled the room with a sense of gravity. He painted the picture everyone had already seen. The video, the screams, the moment life drained from Malik's body. The footage was played again, projected on a large screen. No matter how many times Evelyn had seen it, her heart still broke with every second. The sound of her son pleading echoed through the hall, raw and haunting. Reporters wrote furiously. Some jurors looked away. One officer shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening as if he, too, could feel the weight of what he'd done. Yet the others sat stone still, their hands folded neatly. Evelyn watched them, not with hate, but with an ache so deep it was almost sacred. These men had taken her son's life, but she refused to let them take her humanity, too. Outside, the protests grew louder. The crowd was swelling by the minute, their voices echoing through every street of the city. People who had never met Malik now carried his name like a banner of truth. Some cried. Some shouted. Others stood in silence, candles in hand. Inside, the tension built. The prosecutor's voice trembled with passion as he pointed toward the officers. "This was not a mistake," he said. "This was power without accountability. This was cruelty without consequence." His words struck like lightning. For the first time, one of the officers flinched. Then, the defense began its statement, and the atmosphere shifted. They spoke of procedure, of confusion, of a tragic misunderstanding. They showed edited clips, blurred moments, twisted timelines. They tried to portray Malik as aggressive and non-compliant. Evelyn's chest tightened. Her heart screamed no, but she couldn't speak. All she could do was watch as they attempted to erase her son's humanity in front of the world. Every word felt like another wound, another erasure of truth. Yet even as anger burned through the courtroom, something else began to rise, too. A collective awareness. People watching from around the world could see the manipulation, the coldness. They weren't just hearing arguments. They were witnessing the machinery of injustice laid bare. As the defense rested, a hush fell over the room. The judge called for a break. Evelyn stood slowly, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with both pain and purpose. She walked toward the exit, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. When she stepped outside, the crowd erupted, not with noise, but with reverence. Thousands of candles glowed, flickering like stars in the daylight. A young woman stepped forward and handed her a flower. "For Malik," she whispered. Evelyn took it, tears falling silently. For the first time since his death, she felt something shift inside her, a spark of strength she didn't know she still had. As she lifted her head, she looked at the courthouse behind her. The walls that once seemed unbreakable now trembled under the weight of truth. This was no longer just about her son. This was about every voice that had been silenced before his. The trial wasn't just a fight for justice, justice, justice. It was a fight for history. And somewhere deep inside her heart, Evelyn made a silent promise. They will remember his name. But as night fell, and the city's lights blinked against the dark, whispers began to spread, a leak from inside the courthouse. Someone claimed that the verdict might already be influenced, that politics and money were quietly shaping the outcome. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The second day of the trial dawned beneath a bruised sky. Thunder rolled in the distance as if warning of what was to come. People flooded the courthouse steps again. their umbrellas forming a sea of colors against the rain. Reporters shouted over one another, camera lights flickered, and across every television screen one question burned. Would justice finally be served? Inside, Evelyn sat silently beside her lawyer. Her face was pale but resolute. Her grief had carved her into something unshakable, a mother-turned symbol, her quiet pain becoming a mirror for millions. She glanced toward the jury box. 12 strangers, each carrying the weight of a nation's wound. The prosecution called its final witness, a medical expert. His tone was steady, professional, but every word was a blade slicing through lies. He explained how Malik's injuries weren't consistent with accidental restraint. He showed photographs, diagrams, and autopsy reports that left no doubt. This wasn't a struggle gone wrong. It was an execution of humanity. The courtroom fell silent. For a brief moment, even the air seemed to stop moving. Evelyn looked at the jurors and saw it. The flicker of realization, the unease, the shame of knowing the truth. But she also saw fear, the kind that comes when truth collides with power. Then the defense rose again. Calm, confident, and precise. They didn't argue facts. They argued perception. They spoke of chaos, fear, and duty. The officers acted under pressure, they said. Split-second decisions can't be judged in hindsight. The words were crafted to sound reasonable, almost compassionate, but beneath them was the cold pulse of manipulation. They displayed a photo of Malik, cropped from a social media post, smiling but dressed in a hoodie. He looked suspicious, one lawyer implied without saying the words outright. Evelyn's stomach turned. She felt every syllable as a betrayal, not just of her son, but of every innocent person made to seem guilty for simply existing. Outside, the chants grew louder. People watching live from across the world began flooding comment sections with outrage. They're twisting it again. We saw the video. Don't let them bury him. The collective voice of a global audience was rising against centuries of silence. By late afternoon, the judge announced the closing arguments would begin the next morning. As the gavel struck, Evelyn stood up slowly. The courtroom emptied, but she remained seated, staring at the empty chair where her son should have been. For a moment the world faded away, the whispers, the noise, the endless questions. All she could see was Malik as a little boy, running barefoot through the park, laughter echoing in the summer air. That was who he truly was, not a headline, not a symbol, just her child. When she finally stepped outside, the crowd parted in silence. Someone began singing softly, a hymn broken and beautiful. Others joined, voices trembling but defiant. It spread through the streets like a current of light against the storm. Evelyn felt it wash over her, and for the first time in months she let herself weep. Not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of love that still refused to die. That night, the city didn't sleep. Candles burned in every window. The rain kept falling, but no one left the courthouse steps. People were afraid that once again, truth would be twisted into nothing. Just before dawn, a message appeared online. A whistleblower from inside the department had leaked a file, a document showing that senior officials had pressured the prosecutor's office to maintain public order by avoiding a harsh sentence. Screenshots spread like wildfire. The system was being exposed piece by piece. By morning, the entire city was in an uproar. The truth was now undeniable, but whether justice would follow was another story entirely. And as the sun rose over the courthouse, painting the wet pavement gold, Evelyn whispered under her breath, "If they won't give him justice, the world will." It was no longer just a trial, it was a reckoning. By the time the third day began, the entire city was holding its breath. The courthouse had become a fortress. Barricades lined the streets, police stood shoulder to shoulder, and helicopters hovered in the gray morning sky. News anchors called it the most watched trial in years. Evelyn arrived early, her black dress soaked from the mist. Her lawyer walked beside her carrying a small folder. Still, Evelyn carried something heavier. Every mother's heartbreak that history had tried to bury. The crowd parted as she passed. People didn't cheer this time. They just bowed their heads. Respect had replaced noise. Inside, the courtroom was silent enough to hear the shuffle of papers, the nervous breaths of jurors, the faint hum of cameras streaming to millions. The judge's gavel echoed sharply. "We will now proceed with closing arguments." The prosecutor stood first. His voice was steady, but his eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless nights. "This isn't just about one man," he began, "but about the system that allowed this to happen." He spoke of the footage, the autopsy, the lies, and the fear. He didn't shout. He didn't dramatize. He laid bare the truth that Malik was not a threat, that he had begged for mercy, that those paid to protect had instead destroyed. As he spoke, something changed in the room. Even the officers shifted uneasily. Reporters stopped typing and looked up. The air thickened with emotion. Evelyn's hands trembled, and she pressed them to her lips, holding back tears. Then came the defense. Their tone was colder, deliberate. "This is a tragedy," they said, "but not a crime." The words hit like a punch to the gut. They framed the officers as heroes under duress, victims of circumstance. They blamed training, policy, timing, anything but intent. They spoke longer than anyone expected, circling the truth, but never touching it. Their goal wasn't to convince the jury of innocence. It was to sow enough doubt to cast a shadow of guilt. When they finished, the silence that followed felt suffocating. The judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. As they filed out, Evelyn could feel her pulse in her throat. Outside, the crowd had swelled to tens of thousands. People watched the courthouse doors as if waiting for a miracle to happen. Helicopters circled, broadcasting live feeds to every corner of the world. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, then began to fall. Reporters spoke in whispers, and the crowd's chants faded into a low hum. And then movement. The jury had reached a decision. The announcement rippled through the streets like an electric current. People pressed closer to the barricades. The air was sharp with anticipation. Inside, Evelyn sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly together. The jurors returned, faces drawn and pale. The foreperson stood, a folded paper in his shaking hands. The judge's voice was steady as he asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the man replied. Evelyn's heart pounded in her ears. Every second felt eternal. She glanced at the prosecutor, whose lips moved silently in prayer. The foreperson unfolded the paper. His voice quivered. "On the charge of manslaughter," he paused. The courtroom was so quiet that one could hear the flicker of camera shutters. "Not guilty." The words tore through the room like thunder, gasps, screams, outrage, then chaos. Evelyn's body went numb. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her mind refused to process it. After everything, the proof, the video, the voices, the men who had taken her son's life were walking free. The judge pounded his gavel, shouting for order, but it was useless. Outside, the crowd erupted. Chants turned into roars. The sound shook the glass windows of the courthouse. Protesters surged forward and police lines tightened. The city erupted in flames. Evelyn stood, trembling, her vision blurring through tears she couldn't feel. Her lawyer reached for her arm, but she pulled away and whispered, "They killed him twice." As she turned to leave, the doors burst open. the noise of the crowd crashing in like a storm. The world outside was no longer the same. People screamed her son's name, not in grief this time, but in rage. On live television, one protester shouted, "If justice won't come from the courts, it'll come from the streets." The camera panned to Evelyn, standing at the top of the courthouse steps, her black dress blowing in the wind, her face streaked with rain and tears. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stood, an image that would be replayed for decades. Behind her, the courthouse lights flickered as the storm rolled in. The verdict had been spoken, but the story was far from over. The streets erupted before the courthouse doors even closed. Sirens wailed through the city like cries of the earth itself. The not guilty verdict had struck a wound so deep it felt ancestral. Thousands flooded into the avenues, faces lit by the glow of phone screens and burning torches. What began as chanting turned into trembling. What started as mourning turned into fury. Evelyn could hear it all as she was escorted to her car by officers whose uniforms looked suddenly heavier. "Please, Mrs. Reed, it's not safe here," one said, but she barely heard him. She looked back at the courthouse, cold, towering, its pillars illuminated by lightning. That was the building that was supposed to deliver justice, justice, justice. Now it stood as a monument to betrayal. Everywhere, Malik's name was on the wind, spray-painted on walls, shouted from rooftops, sung in trembling hymns, "Justice for Malik." The rain came harder, but no one left. The crowd was not backing down. They were demanding to be heard. Police lines formed. The air thickened with the scent of tear gas and fear. Protesters raised their hands in defiance, chanting, "Hands up! Don't shoot!" Flames began to flicker in trash cans, then spread to storefronts, until entire streets glowed a deep, red hue. Helicopters beamed down light that cut through smoke and chaos. Evelyn's car never made it far. Traffic had come to a standstill. The city was a living heartbeat of pain. She asked the driver to stop. "I need to walk," she said softly. Ignoring protests, she stepped into the storm. The streets were slick beneath her feet, littered with shattered glass and scattered signs. Around her, people screamed, cried, fought, and prayed. Then, out of nowhere, she saw it. Malik's mural. Overnight, someone had painted his face across the side of a tall brick building. His eyes looked upward, half shadowed by rain, half lit by firelight. Beneath it, words glowed in dripping paint. They tried to silence one voice, but awakened millions. Evelyn fell to her knees. Her body shook, not just from grief, but from awe. Malik was gone, but his presence was everywhere, stitched into the heartbeat of the people. His death had become a language that no wall, no verdict could silence. Across the country, protests spread. In cities thousands of miles away, people held up signs with Malik's name. Hashtags flooded timelines. Strangers held vigils in neighborhoods that had never even heard of him before this week. The world was watching, and the world was trembling. But with the unity came violence. Windows shattered. Fires spread. Opportunists looted while others knelt in prayer. The media twisted it all into noise. News anchors spoke of riots, not of grief. Officials called for order, but they did not understand what was being said. Back at the courthouse, officers were being escorted out under heavy protection. Reporters shouted questions no one answered. "How does it feel to walk free?" one asked. Cameras flashed, and the lead officer smirked, a split-second expression that would become infamous. Replayed millions of times. Evelyn saw that image later on her phone, and for a moment, she couldn't catch her breath. That smirk was the embodiment of everything wrong with the world. She looked at her trembling hands and realized she had two choices: drown in despair or rise through it. She chose the latter. As night consumed the city, she climbed the courthouse steps again, this time alone. Rain pelted her face. Police shouted for her to get down, but she kept walking. In her hand was the flower a stranger had once given her, for Malik. She placed it on the courthouse door, whispering, "You couldn't break him. You won't break me." The cameras caught it all. The mother standing before the building that betrayed her, drenched in rain, defying an entire system. That image, too, went viral. Not as a tragedy, but as power. The fires still burned. The chant still echoed. But in that moment, Evelyn became something larger than grief. She became the pulse of a movement reborn. And as dawn began to rise over the smoke-filled horizon, one truth stood clear. The city was on fire, but so was the world's conscience. The next morning, the sun rose over a city that didn't sleep. Smoke drifted above rooftops like ghosts of all that had burned the night before. Streets that once pulsed with life were now painted in ash and silence. Storefronts shattered. Signs still fluttered in puddles. The world had cracked open, and no one could pretend not to see. News channels replayed the chaos. Politicians spoke of law and order. Commentators argued. But none of them showed what mattered most: the faces of the people who stood in the streets through the night, crying Malik's name, demanding something purer than revenge: change. Evelyn sat by her window, gazing out at the world outside. Her phone buzzed endlessly, calls from journalists, messages from strangers, invitations from networks that wanted her story. But she didn't want to talk. She didn't want fame. She wanted her son back. Still, somewhere inside her, she knew, if she didn't speak now, the truth would be buried beneath the noise. So she rose. She dressed in black once again, her face calm, her heart no longer trembling. She stepped outside and began to walk toward the same courthouse that had once broken her. The streets were lined with people, some still angry, some exhausted, some holding candles melted to their fingertips. When they saw her, silence fell. She climbed the courthouse steps, each one heavier than the last. Cameras turned. Microphones pointed. She didn't prepare a speech. She stood there, her voice trembling yet fierce. "My son is gone," she said, "but his voice isn't." The crowd held its breath. "They can destroy a body, but not a truth. Not this time." Her words carried through the air, echoed through the streets, and began to ripple through every corner of the world. More people joined the protests, not just for Malik, but for everyone whose stories never reached a camera. The movement swelled like a tide that refused to recede. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, something began to crack inside the very system that had failed her. Lawmakers debated. Officials resigned. Whistleblowers leaked documents that revealed years of cover-ups and racial profiling. The truth was no longer confined to whispers. It was shouting through the walls. Then, a week later, it happened. The airline that had defended the officers, the same company whose silence had enabled it all, was served with a massive lawsuit. Investigations revealed years of discriminatory practices, including denied promotions, buried reports, and ignored complaints. Within days, sponsors pulled out, investors fled, and headlines flashed across every screen. Airline shuts down after racism. Scandal explodes. The world erupted again, but this time with vindication. The people had spoken. The truth had become too heavy to hide. Evelyn stood in her living room, watching the announcement on TV. For the first time in months, she smiled not because the pain was gone, but because Malik's story had finally broken something that needed to break. Outside, the chants rose again, but now they sounded different. They weren't desperate. They were determined. They weren't just for justice, justice, justice. They were for change. Evelyn stepped out onto her porch as the evening light bathed the city in gold. Children played in the street again. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years embraced each other. Strangers helped sweep the sidewalks clean. Life was returning, but it wasn't the same. It was awake now. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You did it, baby." The world finally saw. Above her, a muralist was finishing a new piece on the side of a building. A painting of Malik, his face rising from the flames into light. Beneath it, words gleamed in bright paint. Justice may take time, but truth never dies. The crowd gathered around it, candles flickering, voices soft yet firm. Evelyn stood among them, the warmth of their unity surrounding her like armor. As the camera panned out, the skyline of the rebuilt city glowing under the twilight, it was clear this was not an ending. It was the moment between pain and rebirth, between loss and legacy. Malik's name would never fade. It had become a promise. Weeks turned into months, and the chaos that had once filled the streets began to fade into memory. The fires were gone, the shattered glass had been replaced, and the slogans had been painted over. But the silence that followed was not the same kind that existed before. It was heavier, wiser, and filled with a strange sort of power. The city breathed differently now. People looked one another in the eye longer. They spoke more softly, but their words carried more meaning. Evelyn walked through the same park where she used to take Malik as a child. The benches were still there, though the trees seemed older, stronger. She stopped where he once laughed at the pigeons and felt the wind brush her cheek, almost as if he were still beside her. A small group of students passed by, carrying signs that read, "Equality isn't a choice, it's a right." One of them stopped, recognizing her from the news. "Ma'am," the young girl said, her voice trembling, "your son changed everything." Evelyn smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "You are changing everything." The world didn't heal overnight. It never does. But something had begun. Something irreversible. Conversations that had once been avoided were now being faced. Schools began adding new chapters to their history books. Police departments introduced reforms. Ordinary people were standing up when they used to stay quiet. Malik's story had not ended with his last breath. It had become a seed. It started small. Hashtags, murals, vigils. But soon Malik's name crossed oceans. In Europe, Asia, and Africa, protesters carried his face on banners, his story told in languages his mother had never heard. His death had become a mirror reflecting a global truth. Racism was not confined to one country. It was a sickness of humanity itself. Documentaries were made. Speeches were given in parliaments and universities. But the most potent impact wasn't seen in headlines. It was seen in the quiet courage of people everywhere, who refused to let the old world return. A bus driver in another city stopped his vehicle one day and told a passenger being harassed for his skin color, "Not on my bus." A teacher replaced a biased textbook chapter with real stories of marginalized voices. A corporate board began including diversity leaders who actually listened. Little things, perhaps, but it's the little things that tilt history toward justice. Justice, justice. Evelyn would watch these stories unfold online, her heart swelling each time. She realized that Malik was no longer just her son. He had become a symbol of awakening. Months later, the courtroom reopened. This time not for Malik, but because of him. Federal hearings were held to review patterns of racial profiling in transportation and law enforcement. Evelyn sat quietly in the audience as new policies were introduced. Mandatory body cameras, anti-bias training, and stronger oversight boards. They were words on paper, yes, but they were words backed by people who now cared. A senator approached her after one of the hearings. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "I can't undo what happened. But I promise your son's name will be remembered in every line of this reform." She nodded. "Don't remember his name," she replied gently. "Remember what took him." Outside the courthouse, journalists surrounded her again. But this time, Evelyn didn't flinch. She looked into the cameras and said, "Justice, justice, justice isn't about revenge. It's about prevention. My son's story shouldn't be another tragedy. It should be a warning that woke us all." Her words echoed across screens. They were replayed, shared, and written into articles that reached millions. For the first time, her voice didn't tremble. It commanded. Evelyn eventually returned to her job at the community library. The same place where she once shelved books has now become a gathering place, where young people come to learn, to talk, and to dream. Every Saturday, she hosted something called The Circle, where anyone could sit, share, and listen without judgment. People of all colors came, sitting shoulder to shoulder. Some cried. Some apologized. Some heard for the first time in their lives. One evening, a teenage boy asked her, "Do you ever stop being angry?" Evelyn paused for a long moment before answering. "You don't stop being angry," she said softly. "You learn to let your anger guide your love instead of your hate." The mural of Malik on the city wall became a pilgrimage site. Flowers never stopped appearing at its base. The words beneath it, "Justice may take time, but truth never dies," became more than a slogan. They became a vow. Through that vow, Evelyn began to heal. Not entirely. No mother ever truly heals from losing a child, but she found peace in purpose. Her grief had become her gospel. Years later, a new generation grew up learning Malik's name as part of their curriculum. Schools across the nation began Malik Johnson Day, a celebration dedicated to promoting diversity and combating prejudice through storytelling, art, and service. Evelyn, now older but still strong, stood before a crowd of students at one of these events. She looked at the faces, brown, white, black, mixed, all shining with hope. "My son once walked these same streets," she said. He faced hate, but he answered it with courage. "Promise me," she added, her voice breaking slightly, "you'll never let fear make you silent." The crowd stood and clapped, but Evelyn raised her hand gently to quiet them. "The question isn't what happened to Malik," she continued, looking straight into the camera. "The question is, what will you do now that you know?" That line would go viral within hours. People across the world shared it, quoting her as if it were a prayer. Movements reignited, old wounds reopened, but this time not to bleed, but to heal. As the final scene closed, Evelyn returned to that park once more. She placed a single white flower beneath Malik's mural and whispered, "You changed them, baby. You changed me, too." The camera pulled back to reveal the skyline glowing in morning light, the city alive with the hum of progress and hope. And as her figure faded into the horizon, her final voiceover lingered, "Maybe that's what justice, justice, justice really is. It's not the punishment of the guilty, but the awakening of the blind. And as long as one mother still dares to speak, as long as one stranger still dares to care, then, my son, you will never be gone." The screen faded to black with a single line. "Don't just watch the story. Be part of the change."